Welcome to Noob-Splaining. My name is Wolf. If this is your first time here, then this is where I explain the crazy, over-the-top world of Warhammer 40,000 that nerds like me love so much. So, settle in, grab a drink, and prepare for a Noob-Splaining session. So before we get into this video, I have a question for everybody, so please answer in the comments. Do you think that Games Workshop making the Grey Knights a standalone faction was one of the biggest mistakes they've ever made and destroyed the mystique and air of mystery surrounding the Grey Knights? Or do you think it was a good thing? Let me know in the comments. Welcome to this Combat Patrol review. In this video we're taking a look at the Grey Knights. But before we get into that, a big shout out to Anisha. Now if you want a shout out, drop me an email that's in the description. You can also buy me a coffee, which in all honesty I will probably use the money to buy a beer instead. Or maybe save up for a Land Raider. So, you should be used to the format of these videos by now. Brief look at the lore, what's in the box, how to use it, and what to get next. So let's get on with it. So the Grey Knights are a very special chapter of Space Marines that are based on Titan, the moon of Jupiter. Unlike other Space Marine chapters, whose gene seed consists of their Primarch's DNA, the Grey Knight's gene seed comes directly from Emperor Chris himself, making each and every one of them a very powerful psyker. Back in the day, they had a lot of mystery surrounding them, and were only available as allies to Space Marine chapters because they were really fucking good at killing demons. They came in a squad of 5 wearing Aegis Terminator armour and had Nemesis Force weapons. In fact, that was their whole thing. They are demon hunters. That's all they do. Train to kill demons, and then go out and kick the fuck out of all the demons. Then they'll have breakfast and rinse and repeat. If memory serves, they were almost twice the cost of a normal Terminator squad, but if your opponent dropped a Bloodthirster on the table, they were a must, or that Bloodthirster would kick your army's teeth so far down their neck the food would only be chewed as it was on its way back out. Then Games Workshop came up with the genius idea of making them a standalone faction. Whichever muppet came up with that idea should have been shot. So they added a load of new models and lore and dropped the codex, so that instead of now just being demon killers, they can theoretically be found fighting against any other faction in the setting. And I think this is utter bullshit and totally spoiled the mystery around them. The fact they were always in Terminator armour but now have power armour as well was one of the things that spoiled them for me. They lost that feel of being super specialist demon hunters, wearing only the best armour mankind has, to wearing the same sort of shitty stuff any old Space Marine psyker does. The Grey Knights were formed by Malcador the Sigillite, who was Emperor Chris's best friend, and that was towards the back end of the Horus Heresy. And then to explain them not being present for the final battle, Games Workshop did some really lazy writing and had Malcador hide them in a pocket dimension for about 1,000 years, allowing them to grow from just a handful of recruits into a full chapter. Armed with only the best weapons and armour, they emerged from their pocket dimension and were immediately made the militant arm of the Audio Malleus of the Inquisition. You know, that part of the Inquisition that specialised in hunting heretics, traitors, chaos worshippers and demons, not fucking orcs, Eldar or other Xenos factions. They also needed some vehicles, so naturally they got a Land Raider, a Rhino and a Razorback. I must admit, the new sculpts of pretty much every Grey Knight model are amazing, and I do plan on picking some up. And yes, I know I seem to say that about every faction, but I'm at the position now where I'm not collecting an army, so I can just pick up the models for the look of the models, rather than being in my army. However, I still hate the fucking fact of them being a standalone faction, and I think it's one of the biggest mistakes Games Workshop has ever made, and believe me, they have made a lot. They also needed a Dreadnought class vehicle, and seeing as the Space Marines and Custodes already have the whole let's put the injured hero into a sarcophagus and arm it with guns, they needed to think of something else. So we got this fucking abomination. They basically took a Grey Knight and power armour and put it in even bigger power armour. Whoever designed this had either recently watched the final of the Matrix trilogy or been watching a lot of anime. Either way, this fucking monstrosity looks more like someone tried to rip off the 40k aesthetic without knowing anything about it. The icing on the cake is that it is a fairly powerful unit, so pretty much makes it a must for most Grey Knight armies. But frankly, I'd be embarrassed to put that thing on the tabletop. I'd probably cover it with a cloth and say it's deep in prayer to Emperor Chris or some other bullshit. Anyway, that's enough of that, let's see what's in the box. So, you get a Librarian in Terminator armour, who can be the army leader. You get a Nemesis Dreadnought, yuck, which can be built as a Grand Master and a Nemesis Dreadnought, also making them the army leader. You get 5 Grey Knight Terminators, which can be built as Grey Knight Paladin Terminators, and a squad of 5 Grey Knight Strike Marines. That can be built as Interceptor Squads, Purifier Squads, or Purgation Marines. So, that's a lot of options. In fact, I think this box has more options than all the others put together. So let's take a look in detail at each of the units, and in this case, what you should build them as. So the Librarian is just like 99% of all the character units in 40k, and best used in melee combat. At range they can deploy either psychic attacks or normal weapon shots, but only get 1 or 2 attacks a turn, depending what you've armed them with. In melee, however, they get 4 attacks and are definitely meant to take on other characters or tough elite infantry. Having that Terminator armour as well also gives them a decent level of survivability, especially with that 4+ and modified save. So nothing fancy with it, just get it into combat with the enemy leadership, elite infantry, or maybe some light vehicles like scout bikes as fast as you can. Next, the Dread Knight. Yuck. Yes, you want to build it as the Grandmaster Dread Knight. Yuck. As this thing is absolutely insane. You then get to pick 2 ranged weapons out of 3 for it with no duplicates, so let's go through them. First of all, you've got the Gatling Silencer, which is great for mowing through infantry that don't have much armour. It has a massive 12 attacks at strength 6, no modifier to armour save, and each attack only does 1 damage. So it's definitely designed to chew through massed light infantry, but could even cause some problems to Space Marines, especially with those massive 12 attacks. Next we have the Heavy Incinerator, which is basically a giant flamer. It has the same strength and damage, but does actually have a -1 to save. It is also a torrent weapon, meaning you don't need to roll to hit, and go straight to damage rolls, but it has 2d6 attacks, and 6" less range than the Gatling Silencer, so you might potentially only get 2 attacks, you might get 12, but I'd say it's most likely going to be 7 rather than the 12 of the Gatling gun. But after you've rolled to hit with the Gatling gun, you're probably going to be down to 8 hits anyway, so do you take the extra attacks or the -1 to armour save? Then we have the Heavy Psy Cannon, and this is your army's anti-vehicle and anti-character weapon. 6 attacks and a massive strength 10 with -1 save and 3 damage each. That's potentially 30 points of damage and a lot of pain to lay on the enemy. If the enemy has no vehicles and no really tough characters and lots of infantry, take the Gatling gun and the Incinerator. If they do, then take the Psy Cannon and whichever of the other 2 guns you like the most. Moving on to the Terminators. Now, do we build them as Terminators or Paladins? Now, as the Terminators, they get to res 1 model per turn back to the squad in your command phase. The Paladins can't do this, but do get to carry more heavy weapons. So both squads as standard get Nemesis Force weapons and Storm Bolters. As standard Terminators, one of the Marine for every 5 can swap its Storm Bolters and Nemesis Force weapon for a Side Cannon, which while not as powerful as the Dread Knight one, it is still a very good anti-vehicle unit. Or you can swap it for the Silencer, which is a very good anti-infantry unit. There is also the option for a standard Flamer, but as I've stated before, I think Flamers are just meh in this game. Now, both squads all get a 4+ invulnerable save because of that Terminator armour, but the ability to resurrect 1 model per turn is interesting. But you do lose a single Storm Bolter for this, but you're not really going to miss it that much. As Paladins, they can have up to 3 Side Cannons or Silencer weapons per 5 members of the squad. Also, as a special rule for the Paladins, if they are targeted by a weapon with strength 6 or higher, you reduce the weapon's damage by 1, so overall I would say go for the Paladins. The tactics for either squad is pretty much the same though. Move them up, shooting what they can, but don't be afraid to get them stuck into melee, as they are a bit of a beast at both. On to the Strike squad. Now, there's not much difference between the Strike, Interceptor or Purifier squads, except that each has a unique special ability. The Strike squad can capture an objective and move away from it, and as long as the enemy doesn't get within 6 inches of it, they can still claim victory points from it each turn. Now that's handy if you're facing a small number of enemy units, or you have pretty much wiped them off the map. The Purifiers get a bonus to hit, and then a bonus to wound as they take more damage, and the Inceptors get to make a small teleport jump after they have shot, as long as they are not in engagement range. Overall, all of these rules just seem pretty meh to me. One member of each squad can drop their Nemesis Force weapon for a better gun that's either anti-vehicle or anti-infantry, but frankly, they all want to be in melee combat, cutting fuckers up with those Nemesis Force weapons as soon as possible. The final option is the Purgation Squad, which basically makes them into the dedicated Grey Knight versions of Devastators, specialising in either anti-infantry, anti-vehicle, or a bit of both. So if your enemy has massed infantry and or vehicles, go for the Purgation Squad. Otherwise, pick one of the other 3 squad special rule you like, and then get them into melee as soon as possible. So, overall tactics. And herein I suppose lies the flaw in any Space Marine army. No matter how devastating the bolt weapon is in the lore, I mean it's depicted as a .75 caliber, armour piercing, high explosive round that detonates inside the target, literally exploding whoever it gets hit. But the fact of the matter is, Space Marines can do more damage in melee combat with a knife than in a round of shooting with the bolters, and the Grey Knights are no different. Plus, they get Nemesis Force weapons. instead of a standard combat knight, making them even tougher. Now before anyone pipes up that they're not Space Marines, they're made in the same way, they just happen to be psychic too, and skip the whole having a Primarch thing. This, like all Space Marine armies, is designed to board wipe the enemy in melee, rather than gain a tactical victory through securing objectives. So that's just exactly what you need to do. Get stuck in. So, what to add? Well, let's get the obvious one out of the way. The fucking Land Raider, of course, and say it with me, because Land Raiders are fucking cool. You can also get an actual Dreadnought rather than that fucking abomination, the Dreadnought, and it can either be configured for anti-vehicle or anti-infantry, and will smash even some of the biggest and toughest units in melee combat. With the exception of the Purgation squads, all the Grey Knight units are pretty shit hot in melee, and you want to get them to charge the enemy in combat whenever you get the chance. They do also have some very powerful named characters that make a great addition as the leader of your army, but really it's down to the fact, do you want more Terminators or more Marines in power armour? You will get more Marines for your points, but Terminators are incredibly tough to kill, and you can have up to 6 squads of the normal Terminators and 3 squads of the Paladins. With each squad having a maximum of 10 per squad, that's potentially 90 Terminators on the table, which is 30 more than any other normal Space Marine chapter, and 60 less than the Dark Angels. Personally, I would rather see the entire Grey Knights army in just Terminator armour, but that's probably nostalgia kicking in from the days of old when that's all they did wear. Overall, this army has the potential to be absolutely mental, flooding the table with Terminators, some Dreadnoughts, and up to 9 fucking Land Raiders. And if you can stomach it, some of those Dread Knights, yuck. In reality, you're not going to be able to field that many things on anything less than a 5,000 point game. And seeing as most games are only 2,000, it's very rare you will find someone who has the models for that size of game, unless you're going to face multiple opponents. On paper, they are slightly better than their normal Space Marine cousins, but not by much, so you can expect the same kind of kill to death ratio as what you would get with normal Marines. If you're a big fan of silver though, these might be the guys to look at, as you're going to be using a fucking lot of it. Yes, Games Workshop says you can paint them any colour you want, but if it's not silver, it's just not a Grey Knight. Now, they're not the demon killers of old, due to being hit hard and fast by the nerf bat when they became a standalone faction, but they are still slightly better than standard Marines who are already over the top. Unlike normal Marines though, from their army list, you only get 2 choices on Terminators and 4 choices on Power Armoured Marines, of which 3 are nearly identical, so you're never going to have a huge variety in your army. But if you're okay with that, then the Grey Knights can be a very aggressive, tough to kill force.
And there we have it. That brings us to the end of this week's video. If you made it this far, thank you very much. And if you laughed or learned anything, please consider hitting that subscribe and like button. Also, don't forget to share this video with somebody who could do some Noob-Splaining in their life. Please leave a comment. I do try and interact with every comment I get, but most importantly, thank you. And I'll see you next time.